currently working on um, any projects to help save or conserve African elephants?
Yes, I am working with a postdoctoral fellow I have
Okay.
who is studying African elephants in Tanzania,
Okay.
and he's working in a national park called Katavi National Park.
Mm-hmm.
And Katavi is part of sort of a corridor ecosystem where there's Katavi National Park, and then there's a managed forestry area, and then there's a hunting game reserve that are all connected. And what we're looking at there is how the different protected area status from the national park to the forestry to the game reserve where hunting is allowed, how that affects the movements and behaviors of the elephants in these various protected areas. And so far we've just focused in the national park, but the project is going to be investigating all three of those areas.
Okay, cool. Then what have you done, or how have you worked with African elephants personally?
So I've done captive research for my PhD, where I studied how the environment and the social settings for captive elephants affected their reproduction. And then based on that work, I've done postdoctoral research of my own where I studied elephants in South Africa in a national park called Addo Elephant National Park. And basically was looking at the same sort of questions there. How does the social structure of the females and their status within the dominance hierarchy affect their reproduction? And do elephants in fact go through menopause was one of the questions that I was focusing on. Because it's been hypothesized that they should and do, but nobody had ever looked at it physiologically to see if they do.
Based on your current research project on Asian elephants, how is your activity budget for the National Zoological Park?
So that project, we are still analyzing the data. So we've collected data for, I think we started in 2007, and studied the elephants and how they use the exhibit and their habitat before the remodel of the current elephant exhibit, and then we monitored them through the construction and as they brought new elephants into the herd, and we did a year of data collection after that was all settled. And as you can imagine, that's been a whole lot of data, so we're still entering it and trying to see, but the idea is they want to use that information to better manage the elephants and make sure that they are active and have the best well-being possible in captive care at the zoo.
All right.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So what public policies or laws do you think should be improved to better conserve the elephant population, like overall?
I think somehow we need to obviously tackle the poaching issue because that's the biggest issue affecting elephants. But related to that is the increasing problems of human-wildlife conflict. And so it's easy for us to sit back where we're not living with these elephants and sort of impose our opinions on what the local people living with them do. But so we need to have this sort of twofold approach, I think, to decreasing the incentives for poaching and having stricter laws in place and penalties in place for poachers. But we also need to make sure that those same people are getting the education and the jobs and the livelihood that they need. And if living in proximity to elephants is causing conflict and preventing that, then we also need policies in place that help these people. So it really needs, it's not just enforcing the poaching, there needs to be much more, in my opinion, that happens.
Okay, so after the recent election, do you think the conservation funds will be eliminated?
I don't think eliminated. I think there's too much interest and pressure, and I don't think our president has quite the power to eliminate. I do have concerns that much of the positive gains we've made in the past 8 years are going to be rescinded.
Yeah.
And, you know, concerns about denying climate change and things like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So I think funding is probably going to decrease from the federal government. I have heard people argue that when that happens, the private sector and non-governmental organizations tend to get more donations. And so whether or not that can balance what's going to happen with our federal funding, I don't know. But I think overall we'll see a decline. Yeah. So a long answer to that one. And all just my opinion.
Yeah.
So last question. Do you think that because of the amount of poaching for tusks, elephants will eventually evolve and be born without them?
We have evidence of that happening, and actually the park that I study in South Africa, you can see the picture on the wall there. The majority of females in that park are tuskless, and there's evidence that that happened because of the heavy poaching pressure that happened there in the early 1900s, and that it removed the tusk gene from the majority of the population. So I think that can happen, and I think whether it's going to happen widespread, probably not. I think we'll have these unique pockets where they go through a bottleneck because of poaching, and then as the population recovers, it's just going to be dependent on whether or not the gene is strongly there. The males in that population do still have tusks. They're just smaller than we see in other populations, and there are few females with tusks. And they've actually introduced bulls from other areas who have big tusks and have the big tusk gene to try and put it back into that population. But we do have evidence that that can happen, and I believe there's some evidence that it's happening in Zimbabwe these days as well.
Now, how would putting bulls around them give, introduce that gene to them?
So if the bulls with the big tusks have a competitive advantage in getting access to females, then they'll be more likely to breed, and so then that gene will get passed on into future generations, is the thought. Yeah. Basically with elephants, the bigger, badder bull is the one who does most of the breeding. They do go through this heightened sexual state called must, and the must males tend to be the ones who breed, even if they're not the biggest and most aggressive. But the biggest, oldest bulls go through must the longest period of time. So it gives them sort of more access to females, is how it works.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do the male, I guess, elephants, are they like the female elephants? Do they breed? They don't have like a period where they stop having children, or?
No, they can breed throughout their lifetime, because there is sort of this dominance among them. We know males can produce sperm, at least in captivity, as young as their teens, but genetics in the wild show that most males don't start siring young until their mid-20s, and that's typically because they can't compete and they can't get access to the females at those younger ages. But it is more the old, like I said, the older bulls, even in their 40s and 50s even, that are the primary kind of breeders in the population, if they live that long, because they haven't been hunted. So,
Do you have any questions?
No, I think that's it.
No?
Yeah.
Okay, good.